Hey, it's Guy here from Guide Adventures. Now, today is a special episode because I'm traveling en route to a holiday destination, and so I plan on enjoying myself. And don't worry, as when I went to Japan, I will hopefully be recording some cool stuff whilst on my trip for us to use in our next guide adventure. The reason for today's video is a very good friend of mine, all the way from South Africa. She and I know each other for decades and have roleplayed and LARPed and spent time chatting and talking about all things roleplaying. And I caught up with her because recently she has launched and successfully funded, by the time of this video, her Kickstarter for her book, Worldbuilding Blueprints. Now, why am I promoting her book? Because it's the kind of book that I would have written. And I know that if you have liked the stuff that I have done in the past, you're going to love what she's done. It is exactly what you would expect. But I'm going to let her talk a bit more about that. I'm also going to let her talk more about world building in general, because although Guided Adventures is about looking at historical references and drawing inspiration from them, it is part of creating an adventure is to create the world in which that adventure is set. With that, enjoy the interview that I conducted with Marie before her Kickstarter launched. So she was all nervous and going, oh, I don't think anyone's going to fund us. Like, it's going to get funded, don't you worry. Anyway, here's the interview, and at the end of the interview, I've got a little question for you, so you might want to hang around for that. We've known each other for a very long time. And you've been writing novels. You've been writing a lot of novels. How many novels have you written now?
So I'm on fiction. I'm now up to 4 novels written. So I'm series complete. My epic fantasy series is complete, which was an enormous feeling of satisfaction. Mm-hmm. And I've now also finished my first non-fiction book, which is Worldbuilding Blueprints.
That's right, and that's why we're here. Yes. So your saga, your epic, your 4-part epic, obviously that has a lot of world building that goes into it.
Yes. So when I started world building for that, I started exploring world building from the perspective of an author rather than a games master. Now, as you said, we know each other, going back to our shared origin in South Africa.
That's right.
And there, of course, as you know, like I ran LARPs and I world built for LARPs and role-playing games and campaigns and so on. Approaching it as an author brought a very different perspective, right? So it's the same techniques, but when you're building for a game, right, the players come with characters that they already love. You don't need to do anything to build love for characters in. You just need to prepare hooks and, an expanded world for them to play the characters that they love in. But when you're an author, when you're writing a book, you have to provide characters that readers will fall in love with, as well as the world and so on. So there's less of a need for hooks. There's less of a need for open world building that's got, little adventure hooks, and more of a need to make sure that your characters are both correct within the world, but also characters that readers can find something that will keep them reading. And that changed a lot of not my approach to world building as such, but like the things that I built. And so, I started doing the YouTube channel to discuss world building, to discuss how to do world building. And that was in part, it was around Sangwheel at first, was like, what I do with the Sangwheel magic system and the cultures and so on. But it then morphed into like its own thing.
As these things tend to do. So your latest book, which is currently on Kickstarter as of this video, links down below. Is that world building for authors? Is it world building for GMs? What is the book?
So the focus is world building for everyone. It's for both authors and GMs. There is just a slightly different approach as to which way round you do certain things, right? But it's all there for both authors and GMs. And it takes you from zero to hero. The assumption is that you come into the book with you've barely got a story. You've got an idea of the campaign you want to run or an idea of the story you want to run, and it will help you build out from your start to your cultures, your magic system. If you're not using a system with a magic system, it'll help you develop that. It will help you develop your fantastical elements. It will help you develop your geography, your map, your climate, all those kinds of details. And then it goes into depth on your culture, your economy, your religions, all of those elements that you need for in-depth settings.
And is it mainly just, here is all of the theory? Now go do it?
No. I'm not a big believer in all of the theory. So there is a lot of theory in there, but there are over 50 exercises and worksheets that you get as part of the book. And the worksheets are basically, they're like templates. So you fill in what you want and so on. And it guides you through and helps you construct all of those details that you need as a practical step by step.
Okay. It sounds really cool. Now, this whole channel is about looking at history for inspiration, and sometimes it's literally just, oh, dinosaurs, look, now we're making giant monsters roam around the planet, right? So there's sometimes it's tenuous, sometimes it's a lot more hands-on. How important is looking at our own history to you as a world builder?
I think it's really critical. I think if you don't have any understanding of history and the natural world, you're going to have a very weird situation where you create effects that you don't understand because you didn't understand how history works or how people work or how cultures work. And so just on the topic of like the natural world, right? There is in islands, there underneath coral islands, there's a thing called the freshwater lens. That's like a bubble that comes up beneath the island, and it refills when it rains, and it drifts on top of the salt water. And so you can mine for fresh water on a coral island into this lens. And I put that recently in a book that I'm working on for a second saga, right? And somebody said to me, oh, I guess this is a fantastical effect. And I'm like, no, this is real. And that's the thing, we have so much natural wonder to draw on. We have so much natural history around us to draw on. You just need to be aware of it, and then it inspires you to take that and make it more. So, big fan of that approach.
and natural world, I completely agree with you. Now, what about mining cultures? How do you develop cultures? What's your approach?
So my approach is to look at real world cultures and go like, okay, so I want something like this and something like that. But the thing is, when you're doing that, you do have to be cognizant that some cultures wouldn't work together because the circumstances that give rise to those cultures wouldn't occur together unless you made changes. So I'll give you an example. If you look at the Polynesian culture and the Viking culture, they're both boat building cultures, they're both raiding cultures, right? But the way that the Polynesians made boats to like dig out the boat and make the outrigger canoes wouldn't have happened with the Viking materials and vice versa, because Vikings made their boats by tying whale baleen around the planks to make the boats, right? Which is a very cool way of making a boat, but it would never have been something that the Polynesian approach would have even happened in because they had a very different tree growing there.
Mm.
So you have to be cognizant of kind of like which cultures you're mixing and how that works together to create a coherent culture. And that's, I guess, what I try to do with a model that I developed for world building blueprints, which takes you from like, okay, so what is the ideology of your culture? What are the 4 pillars that uphold your culture? And then from there, what are the values of your culture? And then once you have the values of your culture, what are the what is your kinship structure in your culture? So how do the families relate? And, I take you through the kinship models that have existed in our world, like the Hawaiian kinship model and the Sudanese kinship model and so on. And then from there, it's, what is your law structure? What is your artwork look like for that culture and so on? So there are 7 layers to this, as well as then cross-cutting sections like religion and identities and so forth.
So, as a heads up to those of you who are watching, coming up, we're going to see an example of where this cross-cultural thing happens in a certain, dare I say, cave, and the artist was being interpretive rather than doing what you are suggesting of looking at how they mesh together, which is, you'll see in a couple of weeks' time what I'm talking about. Not completely crazy, but let's just say I'm fairly certain the Native American Indians were not big into trading with the Druids or with Spider-Man. But anyway, that's a whole different thing. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see content creators making? And by content creators, I mean world builders making. Do you see mistakes that are like, oh, that could have been avoided, or is it individually unique?
So I think that there are common mistakes people make. The biggest one for me is when people break their own mythic logic, right? I am not an adherent of you have to adhere to real world logic. Okay, you can, by the time we have hit fire-breathing lizards that can also talk, the real world evolution has left the building, and that's 100%. I am down with that. But when you've established a mythic logic, like, for example, dragons are too big to fly, but magic makes them lighter, right? Magic enables them to fly. 100%, I'm on board. But then that must be consistently applied. You can't suddenly say, okay, but we're now in a no magic zone, and dragons can still fly. No. We're in a no magic zone. If magic is what makes dragons lighter, dragons fall down here. All right. So you have to adhere to your mythic logic and be internally consistent.
Yes. Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. So for those of us, I mean, we can probably go and find this on the Kickstarter, but where do you start with world building? Is it not the big bang, but the bright spark of, oh, my world is going to be, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't know. Where do you start?
So I start with what is the story you want to tell or the campaign you want to run, right? So let's say that you want to run a cozy game. You're looking to run a cozy, friendly game, okay? Then your world should support that. Your culture shouldn't be like spiky and hardcore and militaristic, because that's not going to be conducive to a cozy, friendly game. So you want to start with what is your story idea? And that's the first thing that the book helps you develop, is your story idea or your campaign idea. And it's interesting that you said this crossed with that, because that is one of the exercises in the book is, finding the touchstone for your world or your campaign or your story. In that, if you look at, for example, Game of Thrones, which most people know, right? Game of Thrones is the War of the Roses meets a zombie apocalypse. Yeah, that's what it is. That's its touchstone. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is My Fair Lady meets a bank heist. These things are touchstones, right? So my first novel, Hidden Blade, is a medieval James Bond. That's the touchstone for it. And so you find a touchstone for your world. And then that becomes a North Star, because here's what I don't want anybody to do. I don't want people to get trapped into world building eternally. I don't want people to sit and build worlds that they don't run campaigns in and they don't write in. And I see so many people do that. They just get trapped in eternally world building. So I want you to have a touchstone and a thing you aim for, and then you build what you need to run your next session, to write the next chapter of your book, to whatever your current task is. You build out that portion. And every time you add to your world, you look at your touchstone, you look at your North Star, and you say, yes, this fits in with my vision, and therefore it can slot in. It doesn't break any existing canon. My mythic logic remains intact because it fits my North Star. And then you continue onward.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. That's great. That's lovely. That's lovely. I've never thought about it in those kind of in those terms. It's like, okay. So the Kickstarter that
the funny thing is, we both build like that. I know you build like that.
Yes, I just don't think about it.
You just don't think of it like that. No, I know, because I went through the same realization when I started writing the book. And when the channel started, because when I started writing the book, I had to put my methodology down on paper. And that was when I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing. I get it. And then I formalized it and made it more structured. Yeah.
Absolutely. I always maintain, if you want to understand something, teach it to somebody else. Because then you have to understand it and you have to think about it from those different perspectives. Absolutely. So what is the Kickstarter for? I know it's for the book, but what are you hoping to do with the funding from the Kickstarter?
So the book, as it currently stands, is written, and what I want to do is, at this point, is the layout of the book needs to be completed. It needs to get all of its stock art, paid for and so on. And then if we unlock our further funding goals, I want to include additional custom illustrations from a human illustrator who I've worked with, who's done all of my Sangwheel chronicles and the interior art for them and so on. I should say there's no AI art in the book. Yeah.
Interesting times that we live in. Okay, so those are lofty goals, I think. Now, one last question, because you kind of have answered most of this. No, two questions. So, do you have a historical go-to for inspiration? If you kind of hit a blank wall, you're like, this just doesn't work. It's not working. Is there something that you kind of go, well, what did they do, or what happened then? Is there something like that?
So have you thought of the Roman Empire today?
Funny thing, I was actually in one of their chalk mines this morning. So yes, I have thought about the Romans.
So there's a couple of places I go. Actually, it's not just, and I personally tend to like the Roman Republic more than the Empire. So I tend to look at the Roman Republic history because there's a lot of rich history there. The other place that I go is a lot of the African history and African culture, because that is very unexplored in fantasy. So at least I know when I go there, I'm not going to be reusing every medieval cliche. I've got nothing against medieval cliches, but I try not to reuse all of them at the same time.
Makes sense.
And so African culture and history is very unexplored in fantasy. So and because I know it, it comes in very handy. And then the Far East Okay? Now, the Far East is often explored, but the Far East has got such a rich, documented history. Like China's written history stretches back like 5,000 years, maybe not quite that long, but it stretches back very, very far. And so you've got a lot of content to draw. And that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking for so much content that it is not possible for all of it to have been used already in all the fantasy books.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, last question. Is there anything that you wish you had known before starting to write your books that you know now that you didn't know then?
I think the one thing that I wish I'd known before I started with Sangwheel is how much people love the fantastical. When I started writing Sangwheel, I was like, okay, I'm going to make a fairly grounded world. There's going to be magic, there's going to be some fantasy, but I'm not going to include fantastical races or any, like everybody's going to be a human, and I'm not going to go too crazy on like my fantastical animals. I'll throw in some, but I'm not going to go bananas because, I'm not sure like how much people like that stuff. And I'm not so confident in like fully pulling it off and so on. What I've learned over the course of running this channel is that fantasy readers love fantasy. And I know that sounds terribly obvious, but but it's true, right? They love the fantastical. They love the strange animals. They love the magical stones. They love the storms. They love anything weird and fantastical. As long as it fits within the mythic logic of the world, they will love it, right? So, and I wish I'd known that earlier. I might have included more fantastical elements in my world, because people love it. They love it.
There we go. This has been absolutely fantastic, and I could talk to you. I really could talk to you for hours on this stuff because it's just fantastic and so motivational as well. I'm sitting here going, you know me, my life goal is to actually write a fantasy novel. Time to get working on that again and again and not to have draft 55,860. Anyway, I thank you for coming on the show, and links for everything that you've spoken about will be down below. So there you are. Anyway, thank you for...
Thank you very much for having me.
If that didn't inspire you to go off and create some cool stuff, I don't know what will, to be perfectly honest with you. As I was sitting there listening to Maria and looking at all of the stuff that she's done, I'm cognizant of my own new Kickstarter, which will be coming soon. Watch this space. And part of me is like, you know what? And this is the question for you to answer in the comments down below. Should I take Marie's book and should I use it to create a world as one of the guide adventures? It's a deviation from what we normally do, and that's why I'm asking you. This is your channel. I do this content for you. I mean, I do it for myself because I have fun running around and learning all of these cool things, and it gives me a great excuse to get out and go about. But ultimately, this is kind of what you guys want to watch. So, should I take the book and should I create a world out of it in 4 episodes as we have done in the past? Or, kind of go, wow, it's not really historical. No, let's move on. Put your thoughts in the comments down below. And I will be doing a poll on the community tab of the YouTube channel. So that might make it easier for you to vote and to kind of see the responses that other people are giving. Anyway, so that will go up with the video today, and we will discuss those results together as we move forward. Until then, however, I wish you and yours the very happiest of adventure creation.